And joining us now as we talk issues impacting rural America as we wrap up the month of December and wrap up 2022. Pleased to have with us once again our good friend Richard Fordyce, Business Growth Director of Agriculture with Osborn Barr Paramore OBP. Richard, always good to catch up with you, sir. Hope you're doing well.
I am Jesse, and likewise, from my perspective, I always enjoy our conversations, and we get to, it seems like, talk about some important things that are going on in agriculture and the markets, and
Mhm.
so happy to be with you.
Well, thank you for the time as always. As I mentioned there, kind of at the top, wrapping up a busy year in agriculture, wrapping up the month of December, which was busy as well. I know we talked last at the NAFB convention in Kansas City. There was a number of issues we tackled, and I think just looking back here at the year that has gone on, Richard, I mean, right from the start of the year with the Ukraine-Russia war getting kicked off, all the way here through to the end with different issues with the rail strike being averted and more. There's been a lot to digest in agriculture and in the markets here this year, Richard.
You're right. You're exactly right, Jesse. And I would even add maybe one more issue that producers were dealing with going into spring planting of 2022, and that was the availability of inputs.
Hmm.
We there were folks that had traded seed technology seed in their warehouse or in their storage, and then either EPA said you can't use that, or there were shortages for different chemistries, and so folks had to pivot in some cases, not plant the seed that they had in the warehouse or on storage, and then just again supply chain issues that were driving up prices for inputs because of scarcity and also just availability. And I think on that topic, I think, at least from what I hear, that a lot of that's been alleviated. There still may be some issues, maybe around the edges, but a lot of that's been alleviated for sure. But we don't see a lot of price decline in some of those
Hmm.
inputs. So growers are going to have to be dealing with that as we go through these winter months and get ready for spring planting.
Well, you brought up supply chains and the challenges we've seen there. And I mentioned, we averted a rail strike. Last time we talked, we were still kind of waiting for Congress to act. And then Congress did end up acting, and the president ended up acting. Yet I know I've heard in some cases, so some of the service from the class one railroads, et cetera, still kind of poor in certain areas in rural America. So even though, we got the strike averted, you alluded to it, a lot of the challenges have been alleviated, at least considerably, I would say, but it still feels like there's some challenges out there. And I'm sure maybe you're hearing from farmers and co-ops and more as well, that every now and then they might have trouble getting rail cars to, load up grain and send it to an end user. So I know there's still some challenges out there on that rail side.
There are, and I think we mentioned this a few episodes back, but the really American agriculture and those industry partners that growers have made some significant investments. I'd say last 10 years, last 15 years for sure, in investing in rail loading facilities because of southern exports, maybe moving commodities to the Pacific Northwest. And those facilities have to pay when that train comes off the rail. They have to pay demurrage or whatever other terminology you want to use, because they've taken that train out of service to load it. And so they've really made some really efficient, fast loading facilities, and more of them, to load these shuttle trains.
Hmm.
And I've heard, from the people that are managing those and from farmers that are hauling into those facilities, sometimes getting a train maybe when they need it can be a challenge. Certainly when we've got a lot of volume at harvest, sometimes that can, stop up a terminal or an elevator waiting on a train. Those aren't new issues. But I do think that when you think if you or I were in that case as a worker for the railroad, and you didn't get ultimately what you were asking for, and I think, frankly, I think they were asking for some additional sick days was kind of
Hmm.
the work. So I don't know. I think we'll get there. We'll get it resolved for sure. But and just to say this, the rail industry in the U.S. and infrastructure that we have here is certainly a blessing, and it's very much an asset, obviously, for commodity agriculture, both to get our commodities out of the growing regions, and obviously to bring fertilizer and other inputs into the region. So we're very thankful to have them, and they're a critical piece of agriculture here in the U.S. And certainly I say they're a partner, in trying to help American agriculture be better.
Very true. Another issue we've seen, this ties into supply chains and very well could tie into next year, spring planting 2023, has been drought issues. We saw obviously the river levels on the Mississippi and tributaries way down, a bit of a recovery there as we neared the end of the year. And also, plenty of early winter storm systems already giving us a lot of moisture across the northern plains, upper Midwest. That'll be good. Getting some moisture to parts of the central plains, southern plains, southeast as well. So, I look at things here as we near the end of the year, Richard, and it feels like a kind of a double-edged quote unquote win. It's taking time, but we're alleviating some of those drought concerns that we have, it appears, going into next year, and helping out those river levels a little bit.
Yeah, we are. And I was on the Mississippi in September and was really quite surprised, at the river levels. And this was probably the middle of September, where we had some terminals that actually were not able to load barges a little farther south of St. Louis. And then obviously, as we talked earlier in an earlier episode, just the channel width and depth was really limiting, the volume that you could put on the Mississippi. As you said, those have alleviated. I don't know if they're back to like full capacity, the ability to load all the barge tows, the width, and load those as heavy as they normally can. But I know that's certainly. When you mentioned the drought, I've talked to a lot of farmers that were really impacted, by drought, even regionally from a crop yield perspective. I was with a good friend of mine yesterday who was in extreme Northwest Missouri, and he was just talking about their yields. And he said it was the worst of times. It was the best of times. Right around the Iowa border, where they have their northern farm, yields were off 50%. And then as they came down south into Missouri, where it seemed like those storms just continued to track, throughout the growing season, maybe a record yield. And that's not very far. That's not a very far distance. So, and we saw that all over the country, but certainly in the West, where we saw a lot of devastating drought, we saw a lot of cattle that were liquidated, which that's going to affect the cattle market going forward for a couple of years at least, because we literally have made the cow herd, the females in the U.S. herd, that number is significantly lower due to the drought. But as you mentioned, upper plains, upper Midwest, a lot of relief coming in the form of quite a bit of snow and moisture events, and that's really going to put them in a good position to recharge that subsoil moisture and hopefully get them in a good position as they go into spring planting.
Richard, let's talk a little bit about what's going on in D.C. Lame duck Congress ongoing right now. We've got the political battles figured out. We know who's in control of each chamber of the House and the Senate, and looking at a farm bill. That's going to be the big lift, it appears, into 2023. What are your thoughts? What is the latest you're hearing when it comes to this farm bill, and what we could have in front of us and in store here as we get into 2023?
Yeah, I think obviously, as we know, the Republicans now hold a slim majority in the House. The Democrats will retain control in the Senate. And so Chairman G.T. Thompson, he was just elected, just a few weeks ago, is going to have some priorities about where the direction, at least of the conversation and priorities of where this 2023 Farm Bill will go. I still believe that, they say it's going to be budget neutral. And so any cost increases in some titles will have to be offset in other titles, or even within a title of the Farm Bill. If there are changes to what the cost is, that's going to have to be offset somewhere. Now, they say it's going to be budget neutral. Now, whether it will at the end of the day be budget neutral, I don't know. And the reason I say that is that we're experiencing 9% inflation. So the budget that the Farm Bill would have bought, when they wrote the Farm Bill in 2018, doesn't buy the same thing as it does today. And so I think it'll be interesting to see where it is from a budget standpoint. And that's a little ways down the road as far as the progress of the Farm Bill. But again, I think, we've talked in the past, Jesse, you and I have a couple of things that I think are going to be interesting to watch. And that will there be legislation? So it'll be law of the land once the Farm Bill is passed, the ability to create more flexibility in crop insurance. And then what happens with the whole climate smart ag? And, we've got groups across the spectrum that are advocating for certain practices, certain rewards if farmers do certain things. And I am less confident of where I think that'll land today than maybe I was a month ago. I think, I think anything could be conversations happening daily from advocates of different approaches to different members of the House Ag Committee and the Senate Ag Committee too, for that matter. But I think those two things are going to be interesting to watch and see how they start to develop. I also think that, if we call it the 2023 Farm Bill, it literally has to be passed and signed by the president in 2023. There's a ton of work yet to be done. There's a ton of consensus that has to happen and, collaboration to get that thing finished. I don't know that we're there yet. I'm really keeping my ear to the ground on this one to see kind of what the general temperature is of folks to kind of move things forward. But there is an opportunity for an extension of the 2018 Farm Bill. If they don't get the 23 legislation done and to the president's desk, they can extend the 2018 Farm Bill, which has happened a number of times. So it's not it's not something that we should be panicked about. And I would say that if they don't have it exactly where they think they need it, and they can get the most consensus on it from, everybody that's weighing in on where that 23 Farm Bill should be, then they probably should extend it and get an opportunity to do a little bit more work on it.
Well, I know as well, you brought up crop insurance. That seems to be the biggest issue I hear from most every farm group I talk to is they want to make sure to protect that farm safety net and crop insurance. And I know that is going to be a very vital piece of this Farm Bill, Richard.
So I didn't catch the beginning of that, Jesse. I think I lost a little bit of signal.
Yeah, I just said, you brought up crop insurance, and I've heard from a lot of ag groups. It seems like the common theme is they want to protect that farm safety net, and that is going to be a key issue, I feel like, going into this Farm Bill, Richard.
It is, and so whether it's allowing more flexibility for folks to insure crops maybe in a little different way or at a different level, adding crops or adding cropping systems that currently aren't covered or aren't, not in, you don't have the ability to do that. I think that's one of those things. And then, we've talked about this before too. So we're looking at really the advancements in seed genetics and, just the way folks are managing their cropping systems. Now, RMA does have the ability to move those planting dates, those early planting dates and late planting dates. And we've seen some movement there to more accurately reflect when folks are actually planting, corn and soybeans and other crops, to be more reflective of what U.S. agriculture looks like today. I applaud those efforts, and I would applaud any effort, whether it's through the legislation of the 23 Farm Bill or through a regulatory approach, to continue to grant flexibility in crop insurance. So yeah, I think that's going to be a big conversation. And you said it just a minute ago, Jesse. It is, it's the premier safety net for farmers. If you think about the hundreds, and we're getting close to thousands of dollars an acre invested to plant a crop, man, you got to. Yeah, so I think certainly, I think everyone is in agreement that we've got to maintain and support, and maybe even plus up crop insurance where we can. But so everybody agrees on that. I think maybe this flexibility conversation, that might be where we would have different ideas from different groups.
One other thing I wanted to pick your brain on too. I know you're a cattle guy. We have the cattle contract library pilot is out there now, and there's the debate on the Grassley Fisher bill. And I know, talking to various cattle groups, everyone's on different sides of this. Doesn't sound like it's going to be brought up until we get into the new Congress in January. When you talk to cattle folks, what do you hear when it comes to all this reform we're talking about in the cattle industry right now?
Yeah, so I hear the same thing, Jesse. It depends on who you talk to, what their perspective is, where they are in the value chain of the cattle business, right? Like, cow-calf guy may have a different, or cow-calf producer, could be a guy, could be a lady. A cow-calf producer might have a different perspective than, a backgrounder or a stalker who may have a different perspective, from someone who's finishing cattle. People who retain ownership, people who, are going ahead and selling those cattle and letting somebody else finish them. I am not saying this to be offensive. I'm actually saying this to be complimentary. But the cattle sector, so the U.S. cattle sector is probably the most complex when it comes to how producers feel about an issue. And everyone that's in that whole value chain of the cattle industry are all invested, right? So it's not somebody standing on the sideline who maybe doesn't understand the issue. From the perspective of that person's involvement in the cattle industry, their opinion matters, and their opinion is going to be different than somebody else's, right? And so I've done this for years. Back when I was director of the Missouri Department of Agriculture, we spent the whole entire year of 2015 trying to figure out how to add value to Missouri's cattle herd across the board. And it didn't take very long to figure out that's a hard thing to do, because and I know I'm wandering here, but at the end of the day, I compared cattle producers to soybean producers, and there is such a difference in the complex of those two commodities. Because if you're a soybean grower, almost every soybean grower in the country is planting a seed. They harvest that seed. It goes to a processor. You get oil and you get meal, and it goes to end users. Everybody in the soybean industry have the same motivations and objectives. Not everybody in the cattle sector have that. And it makes it difficult. And, I applaud. I don't know enough about it to talk about it as far as the intricacies of it, but I applaud the Grassley Fisher bill as trying to do something, right? And, again, I will even tell you, in Missouri, those conversations can differ whether you're in North Missouri or if you're in South Missouri. So it's really, I'm not answering your question at all, Jesse, but I do know that that I think there's a general expectation that we get some reform. It's just getting like getting it right, I think is really hard.
I couldn't agree more. And it's a lot of what I heard too is that, something I feel like could happen there. I guess, we'll just have to wait and see what that something is. Richard, before we wrap it up here for this month, again, I always appreciate the time and insight. Any final thoughts you have as you just take a look at where agriculture sits right now here as we wrap up the year?
Yeah, thanks, Jesse, for the chance to do that. And I promise I'll be quick. I think, a lot of those were overcome either, really timely, kind of right at the end. We talked about the rail strike. We talked about, just the transportation infrastructure issue, supply chain, input costs. Now money's costing us more. Interest continues to go up. The Fed seems to think that's the way to control this inflationary situation we're in. Not an economist, but I think maybe I'd try something else anyway. But things are positive in American agriculture, really. We talked a little bit more about cattle today than we have in the past. And projections are good for the cattle market, going out. Wheat and other commodities. And so I think things are positive moving forward. Again, there'll be challenges, no doubt about it. We'll keep our eye on those and we'll mitigate those as best we can. That's what we do in agriculture, right? I don't remember a perfect year ever since I've been involved in the industry, and that's since 1983. And get through 2023, no matter what that brings. And with that, Jesse, I'd like to say probably a belated Merry Christmas, but certainly a Happy New Year to you and to all the listeners out there. Wish you the very best and profitable 2023.
Well, we appreciate the time. We'll wish you the same. Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, Happy Holidays, and thank you for the time. With that, Business Growth Director of Agriculture with Osborn Barr Paramore, Richard Fordyce. Thanks for joining us, sir. We'll talk to you again in a couple of weeks.
Sounds great. Thanks, Jesse.